Hi everyone, thanks for coming out today. Despite the crazy potential snow that could be happening, we're really happy you could join us. Today we have Natasha from the Mystic Seaport and Museum here to talk about Connecticut whaling culture, which is super interesting and is part of this week, is wrapping up this week of Connecticut themed programs here at the library. We're really glad you could join us. They have a bunch of really neat artifacts from the library here today so that you can explore, and a really great presentation. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Natasha in just a moment. And if you like programs like this, where you kind of are able to access the cool things that are happening around Connecticut, museums, interesting educational opportunities, right in your town library, I hope you'll consider a donation to New Canaan Library. We have a donation box in the back, and your pennies left over from coffee this morning really go a long way. They add up, and we put them toward programs like this. So if you like this, cast your vote with $1 or $2, and we'll keep programs like this coming. All right, have fun. Join me in welcoming Natasha from Mystic Seaport.
Sorry, I have to just first apologize. The best things happen when your throat goes bad. I just recently got sick, so the microphone is really going to help. But if you have any problems hearing me, I sound a little bit like Lauren Bacall right now, which can be a good thing. But just please let me know. I'll try to speak up as much as I possibly can so everyone in the back and in the front can hear me. So to start out, again, my name is Natasha Przybylski. I'm a museum teacher at Mystic Seaport. I'm also an interpreter. I also work in the visitor center. So I do a little bit of everything there, but my favorite thing, my love, is to teach. I went to school to teach, and I just fell into Mystic Seaport. For those of you who don't know anything about Mystic Seaport, first of all, who here has ever been to Mystic Seaport before? Oh, good. This is good. If you haven't, you've probably heard of it before. Living in Connecticut, it's really hard not to. We talk a lot about whaling, whaling history. We have the Charles W. Morgan, which I'll be talking a lot more about in the presentation to follow. But to start out, whaling. Can anyone, I'm a teacher in this way, I like to ask questions and engage the room first. Can anyone tell me a little bit about whaling, what they might know? Yes, thank you for raising your hand too.
Hey, I'm pretty sure whaling's about like killing whales and getting some oil out of it.
Good. All right, we got a good start. Killing whales to get the oil out of it. Yeah.
Nantucket was one time the whaling capital of the United States,
Yeah.
and many ships that sailed from Nantucket in the 1800s. The voyages were years, sometimes in length. Many of the ships got lost, and it was the spermicide that they were trying to get from the whale, amongst other things.
Beautiful. Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear, we talked a little bit about Nantucket, which we'll also be talking a lot about. Nantucket was one of the whaling capitals of the world. A lot of ships did go out from there. Some of them didn't come back. And they were out looking not only for oil, but also for this really special kind of oil called spermaceti. Anything else? This side, you're looking pretty bad right now. Yes?
Well, New Bedford, Massachusetts was also very much a part.
Beautiful. New Bedford, yes. Did she take your answer?
One of the things at the Seaport that is the coolest thing on the face of the earth is your example of baleen.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. Brownie points to you. Yes, baleen. And we'll talk about baleen, which I actually have some with me. I don't know why I'm whispering. It's on the microphone. But I actually brought some baleen with me so that you could touch it, feel it, look at it a little bit. So can I get the lights dimmed in the front, if that's possible? Anybody here? They all left me. Okay, well, that's fine. I'll keep going. All right, so this is an image of the Charles W. Morgan in New Bedford. Someone, before the presentation started, pointed out that there's a lot of flags. Ships typically don't look like this, especially for those of you who sail. You know that this is not the case. But this would happen for a very special event. a holiday of some sorts, a big voyage comes back and they're celebrating. They would usually put the signal flags up in order to put some color and splash. And still, when the Morgan came back from her voyage this past summer, and during big holidays at the Seaport, we do the same thing. So, sorry. All right. So we've already answered this question of why people went out whaling. They went out in order to catch whales, right? And they had to get the blubber. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. They had to get the blubber from the whale. Now, can anyone tell me what is blubber? When I use that phrase, what am I talking about? It's the layer of fat on a whale. It's typically about a foot thick. So imagine that in your heads, because we're going to be talking about the process of killing the whale. And one of the major things, and most dangerous things, is actually puncturing that layer of fat. And when you try out, or when you cook that oil, that blubber, the oil is going to be coming out. So we're doing that. And at its height, for whaling's height, they had over 1,000 ships in a fleet going to catch whales. Now, by the 1920s, when they're going to be talking about the end of whaling, there's literally 2. And one gets grounded, so we have one left, and that would be the Charles W. Morgan. And so, as you can see here, this is a great picture. It really captures this idea. This is, I think this is in New Bedford. So, like we had said, that's one of the biggest whaling capitals. After Nantucket came New Bedford, and we'll talk about the reasons why Nantucket fell off the wagon for being the height of whaling. But typically in a dock, you would have this amount of barrels of oil coming off of a ship after a voyage. Because you have to figure, the only reason that people are going out whaling, because it's a very dangerous job to have, and I'll discuss some of those dangers, and if I don't, remind me to. But they don't come back until that hold or the bottom of the ship is full. It is impractical for them to not do that. So what does that mean? That means that they're out for many, many years. That means that the later and later we get in the history of whaling, the longer and longer voyages are, because we all know that once people start whaling a lot, the population is going to decrease. So that means it's harder for them to actually find these precious whales. But typically, for the Morgan, she can carry about 3,000 barrels of oil, okay? And it depends. A lot of times, kids will ask me, well, how many barrels can you get from a whale? And my answer is usually, well, it depends on the size of the whale. You know, a good whale could get 100 or so barrels, but, you know, again, it differs. So this is a lot, right? And this is all getting used in different settings, and we'll talk about those different ways. But I want you to just imagine this as we start to talk, that there was a time in our history where this is what a typical dock looked like in maybe New Bedford or in Nantucket. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. So this is a good schematic. As you can see, we have the bow or the front of the ship, and we have the stern. And in the bottom in the hold is where the barrels of oil are being kept. And so when the voyage goes out, typically that's full of supplies, but as the voyage continues and continues, those supplies are getting used up and is being replaced by barrels of oil. And so when you look at the ship, the makeup of the ship, you have this very, very narrow section right around here, okay? And that's where the crew is living. If you've ever had a chance to go on the Morgan, you're going to notice that it's very cramped quarters. People who are like taller than me, so 5'4" and up, have a hard time because the height is very short. Now, people are no shorter than they are today, but they don't really care about the crew's quality of life. Okay, you're not on a cruise. So people who are 6 feet up, they have to crouch a lot of times. And so those tween decks, which we call them, are very thin and very small in order so that the hole can be bigger. Because if the hole can be bigger, then why is that important? I know. More room for more barrels of oil so you make more money. And the ship owners, that's their main concern, is to make more money. So, first things first, we're getting the oil from the whale, right? And you can see all different kinds of oil can come from all different kinds of whales. And the 3 major whales that we hunt are right whales, okay? They literally got their name. Are you ready for this? You can go home and tell your friends and family about this. They literally got their name because they're the right kind of whale to hunt. Yeah, really. When the settlers were coming over, especially like the Plymouth, they saw a lot of these different kinds of whales, and when they realized all the different qualities which makes them good whales to hunt, and I'll get to those later, they said, wow, we're going to call it the right whale. And so there's the right whale, there's the bowhead whale, and then there's the sperm whale. And each whale renders a different type of oil. Some are more refined, some are less refined. So even their color and texture is going to be different. And the darker you get, pretty much the worse and worse quality you have. And on the left here is the spermaceti oil. And we'll talk a little bit more about the spermaceti oil, but this is the most refined oil in the world. Even man-made can't get to this level of cleanliness. And it was used on the Hubble telescope until I think a year ago because it's so good for machine cleaning and for getting those gears to work. And so when they would go out, this was a major thing. Was if you wouldn't go out, you got a humpback whale. The humpback whale may not be as good as a bowhead whale. So they have to be very choosy, very picky about what they get. And so the whale oil is used in a lot of different products. Okay, we typically think about it for lighting, but it also is used for soap. Why you would want to use it, I don't understand. But still, it's a different way to process that, okay? And as I had mentioned before, not only is whale oil great for lighting, but it's also great for lubrication. And we're talking in the 1800s about a time where we have this growth of industry. Now, what was that called? The? Industrial Revolution. Oh, I'm not convinced. I want to hear the whole room say it. The what? Industrial Revolution. All right, garbage, but good. I like that. Yeah, the Industrial Revolution, okay? They helped one another. Because without the Industrial Revolution, whaling would not have been as popular. Without whaling, the Industrial Revolution could not have really continued. Because this was a great source of lubrication. And so, especially we have for like watches, okay, those little gears. For in the blacksmith, for some of the tools that he has to use, the drill press, for the cooper, to lubricate some of his tools in order to carve, he's got to have oil, and this is the best kind. There we go. And then we also have the idea of lighting, right? Because electricity doesn't come around until the turn of the century. And so what other sources can they use? Okay? They have like animal fat, but if anyone's ever like used animal fat candles, it smells disgusting. Right? It has a bad smell, and it has a lot of smoke that comes around. And in this time, when they discovered that whale oil was great for candles and for lighting, they realized that it doesn't smell as bad, okay? And it doesn't have as much smoke. So this was used a lot. And we have all different kinds, there's a myriad of different kinds of lamps that were used. I have one with me today. I have a very small version I bring on tours. But as you can see, they would put it in this bottom section, and then they would have the wick, and they would light it that way. So we're hunting them for that. And even so much that the whale oil is used in lighthouses. And because you have to imagine, there's no electricity, you don't just light a candle. And so talking about seaport towns and how necessary lighthouses are, the whale oil helped light ships to come back home, which is very poetic. All right, biology. So I usually ask students, what kind of whales do they know, just to gauge. Very few ever come up with the sperm whale, even though the sperm whale, for those of you who don't know, is the mammal of Connecticut. Yeah, I know. Take that home with you. And so when they are hunting whales, okay, so here's a person, a scale. It's very hard for you to see. But the kind of whales that they're hunting, we have, where's my sperm whale? Oh, he's got to be over there. He's all the way over there, okay? And then we have the bowhead whale, very important. And then we have our right whale over here. And the right whale, we'll talk about the different ways that they could tell. But we have toothed whales that we're hunting, and we have baleen whales. And so some of these whales, they would not want to hunt, okay? Blue whale, a lot of kids always tell me, well, why not the blue whale, right? It's the biggest mammal in the world. No, okay? And there's 3 reasons why people picked the whales that they did in order to hunt? Are you ready for this? I'm going to ask you this later. This is going to be a quiz question. Okay, the first reason is that blue whale is enormous, okay? It's really big. See little beluga whale? Anyone wants beluga whales? Yeah, they didn't hunt those either because they were too small, okay? And a lot of times the whales that they're hunting are average size, okay? They don't want anything too big or too small. It's like Goldilocks and Three Bears. They want just the right size. So that's the first one. You gotta have a good size. Second of all, for those of you who don't know, blue whales are super fast. Okay, even though they're big, they move very quickly. And for the whalemen who are out in their little whaleboats rowing and rowing and rowing and trying to move fastly but be quiet, they're too fast for them. So that's not practical. We want whales a little bit slower. And so the last one, most important, is that a lot of these whales, when they are killed, they sink. Okay, they don't. But the sperm whale, the bowhead whale, and the right whale, they float when they die. And when we talk about the process of catching the whale, that's going to be a very important point. So, northern whale, right whale. He's got these little kind of like bumps on him, right? And these are kind of like, what's the other word? Like barnacles, exactly. They grow on them. And they also have baleen. Okay, very important point. The baleen comes from the bowhead whale and the right whale. And baleen is really, really useful. There's the bowhead whale. You can see the difference between him. He doesn't have those little barnacles. He's got a little white patch over here. It looks like he's smiling. But very important is that baleen whales, when they have their spout, I don't know if you know about this, but instead of having one spout, they have two. Okay? And for our lookouts, who are on the top of the masts and the hoops, that's a very important thing. Because you have to be able to tell the difference. And I asked this question. I was like, well, how do they know? They're miles away, and all they see is just a little coming out of the water. Well, it really is important. They'll say if it's one spout or two. That means maybe it's a sperm whale. Woo-hoo. Or maybe it's a bowhead whale. And then they can find out if it's two, they'll say, oh, look it's breaching and it has a little bit of white patch. We know what kind of whale that is now. So baleen comes from, it's like their teeth. So it starts out from their gums and it moves down and it's very flexible. Okay, it moves kind of like bristles on a broom. So what it does is, for those of you who don't know, if you do know, then you can just listen and be amazed by the way I talk about this. It opens up its mouth, and it brings in water, and also not only brings in water, but it brings in all those small microorganisms we don't really see very much, like zooplankton, phytoplankton, krill, and it sucks all that in, and then it closes its mouth, and it pushes out the water. It doesn't want the water, it wants the other things in there. And so that's the way it works. Now what I want you to do now is I want you to lift up your hands. I want you to look at your hands, okay? In particular, look at your nails. Because your nails are made out of the same materials, exact same materials as baleen. All right? It's made out of a substance called keratin. Very good. Good job. Someone over there said it. Good job. Keratin. Now, it also moves the same way. When your fingers are in the water for a long time, right, your nails get pruny, but your nails also get very soft. And so when the baleen is in the water for a very long time, which is the whale's entire life, the baleen is able to, it's very flexible, it's very soft. But when you take it out of the water, the longer and longer it's out of the water, the harder and harder it becomes, like our nails normally, right? And so when you see the baleen that I brought with me, you're going to notice it's not the way you would expect it to be in its mouth. It's going to be very hard. It's going to be it's not translucent. It's very rough, but that's because it's been out of the water for a very long time. And it needs to be, in order for it to function, in the way we want the baleen to function, it's got to be tough. So this is typically how big the baleen is. To scale to that little guy over there. And these are some of the uses of baleen, right? They take the baleen out of the whale's mouth and they can use it for those little pieces of umbrella, right? They can use it for buggy whips. They can use it for corsets. And I have a corset with me, which it's a reproduction that I bought. But you have to imagine this is a time before plastic. I have to constantly remind kids that this is a time before we have that kind of man-made synthetic things. Everything has to be natural, You don't have factories producing this or scientists creating it. And so when they made the corsets for women, right, and they're wearing it in order to give them a nice hourglass figure, which was considered very fashionable, it had to be very rigid in order for it to keep its form, its shape. And so we found out when whaling ends, the only reason when they find petroleum in the 1840s and 1850s, the only reason that whaling even continues is for women's fashion. And can anyone guess what kind of ended women's fashion? Yeah?
Before we go on, I think the R&G corset company is in South Norwalk.
Really?
The original building is still there, it's now condominiums. That's the old, I don't know if it's R&G, but it is the old corset company.
Yeah? Very cool. Look at
It
that.
used to come right up the Norwalk River.
Bringing local history. So there's an event that happened in the 1900s. I'll give you that. And women's fashion dramatically changed, and they no longer wanted this form. Who said it? Flappers, right? You want that boyish form. You wear those kind of like straight dresses. You don't need this anymore. Short too, right? And so after that, it discontinues. After the 20s, you see it dropped very, very much. And so this is my friend. You're going to get very acquainted with this guy over here. This is the sperm whale, all right? So some very key features about him. First of all, he's gray. Very typically, they're dark colors. You're going to notice the shape of his head. It's like a box shaped. He has the largest brain of any mammal in the entire world. His head alone is 1/3 of his body. Right? He's very disproportionate. But so this is a key thing. Also, you'll notice he's got teeth on the bottom jaw only. He's got a little hump right on his back. And he has different kinds of dorsal fins. So when they see this is a huge money maker. And you can see this is an example of the spermaceti candles. And just to go back, just to talk about this right here. So the spermaceti oil, it exists right in here. It's this enormous kind of cavernous bulb that just sits right there. And scientists can't figure out why the heck it's there. What is its purpose? They don't know. Okay, this is one of those mysteries of the world. But it's in there. And so when they would go out whaling and they would catch the whale, you may not see it in some of the slides here, but what they would do is they don't want the whole part of the whale, right? They want the blubber, so they'll peel that off, and then they want the stuff that's over here. So you might see, sometimes if you look up whaling, they'll cut the head off of the whale, and they'll start taking the pieces off on the ship itself, because they want these teeth, and they want that oil in there. And if they lose that, then they're losing a lot of money. So this is another thing. Now this thing is a little bit nasty. This also comes out of a sperm whale. Does anyone have an idea? Say it louder.
Ambergris.
Ambergris, very good. So for those of you who don't know what ambergris is, the main diet of a sperm whale is, does anybody know? Squid, giant squid, right? And so when they dive down to get those squid, the very dangerous part of a squid is its very sharp beak on the top. And so as a way to protect itself, the stomach and the intestines coat that beak with like this really strange substance, and it wraps it around and it processes it, and when the whale either coughs it up or the other or something else, this pops out. And so sometimes they'll be floating in the water. Sometimes when they would catch the whale, they would go through the intestines to try to find if they could get it. But so this stuff is used primarily for perfume. Not as a scent, let me tell you that. But it's used for, does anyone have an idea of why? It retains the smell for a very long time. And this, not in the United States, but in Europe, they still use ambergris for very refined perfumes in order to keep that smell. And actually, there was a couple years ago, a kid in, I think it was Spain, maybe, or Portugal, somewhere in Europe, found a piece of ambergris on a shore, and it's worth its weight in gold. I think it was over $15,000 or $20,000 for this piece of ambergris. Yeah, I don't understand why, but that's the way it works. So, So this is an old carving taken in France. So I want you just to give you a second to look at this. You'll notice some things about this carving. Anyone see anything weird or unmentionable that you want to point out? By the way, this is called whale fishing. For those of you who can't read the little subtitle. What do you notice?
There's this two-headed serpent in the water.
There's a two-headed serpent in the water. Where?
Like on the top over there, and like some demon over there.
Yeah, good. There's a demon. There's like weird serpents up top. Anything else you notice? Yeah.
Is that a guy playing bagpipe?
That is a guy playing bagpipes. Very good. Anyone else? I feel like the auctioneer. If I see a hand move, I'm going to call on you. Yeah?
There's also that strange creature all the way up in the upper right with
Yeah.
horns.
Yeah, that's one other thing. It looks like a demon. Yeah.
The whale, I guess, figuring it's a mammal that has breasts.
Yes.
The other thing is there's no tri-works there to boil down the oil.
There's no tri-works. It has like little like udders almost. Do you notice its head? That region over there? Right, look near the bagpiper's feet. You're gonna see two little kind of like chimneys popping out of its head. Yeah, spouts, right? So this was done in Paris. For those who don't know, Paris is not on the water. So a lot of times we talk about that this is in a time where people really didn't have a lot of access. Yes?
And a toothed whale has one spot, not two.
There we go. See? So at a time where people really didn't know that much about whales, they were just these weird creatures that came out of the water. I mean, they didn't have internet. They didn't have a lot of books and first-hand accounts. They didn't know what they look like. And so this person who's drawing this really doesn't know what a whale looks like. But there's a lot of inaccuracies. And we still can't figure out what the serpents and the demon is all about. But the bagpiper, can anyone have an idea of why there's a bagpiper there?
So they work in unison, maybe?
Yeah, can anyone think of a modern day? It's not a bagpiper, but there's someone else. It's a job. It's a job. Usually on a ship, when you have to do work, there's someone who's doing singing. Like sea shantymen. I heard shanty. A sea shantyman who keeps the rhythm of the work, right? Bagpiper will do that too. And so we have, but also this is a really great example of shore whaling, right? We talk a lot at the Seaport about offshore whaling, right? That's a huge thing because that's the bulk of the 1800s is shore whaling. I mean, offshore whaling, going out to sea, but in a time where they didn't really have to, they would just do it on shore. And especially when we're talking about, Connecticut whaling, Nantucket whaling. Nantucket started whaling on shore. They would find a beached whale, and they would just process it. And the tri-works are not here in the picture, but they would typically be right close by in order for them to cook that whale. But when there were so many whales in the sea, and when the Pilgrims came, I remember them saying one of the phrases is like that their boat kept getting hit by all these whales. Imagine a time where whales were just hitting your boat constantly, and just pods and pods of them. It's impossible to imagine nowadays. When you see a humpback whale, you have to go out on whale watches to find a whale. But there was just there's such a multitude of them. So but then after a few years after Nantucket, I think they only did shore whaling for about 30, 40 years, and then all of a sudden all the whales are gone. Because they're killing. They're even in little boats just nearby the shore. They're killing 11 whales a day. It's hard for the whales, the population, to catch up with that. And so, but this is how it always starts. It always starts on shore whaling, and then people will all start moving out. All right. This is not a picture of the Morgan. This is another picture of a whaling ship. But they start building bigger and bigger ships. And they have to start going out, like I said, again, for longer and longer. And in the case of Nantucket, when they start building larger and larger ships, for those of you who don't know, there's a shoal on the eastern southern side of the island, where it's very shallow. And for a large ship like this, it might get grounded. And so it would cost a lot of money. So when we're talking about the downfall of some of our really great whaling ports like Nantucket, that's one of the reasons, is that it costs too much for a whaling ship to get stuck and have to transport all of those hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil, have to transport them. And so this is the magnitude of the 1800s is spent with this kind of whaling, right? And this gives you a really good idea, right? We've got our little home port right over here. We've got New Bedford, we've got Nantucket, we've got New London, right? And can anyone give a good idea of what their typical path was? Does anyone have an idea? When you start out from the East Coast, where you might go next? You're going to go down south? Good idea. Okay, we're going to get there eventually, but we have to first go to the Azores and Cape Verde. Okay, we're going to go there first because according to the winds and the way that the waters move, to go straight down is so much work. So much work. But to move this direction is a lot easier. And they can also catch supplies there. They can get people. You have to remember a lot of the whaling crew was very mixed races. And they had a lot of people from the Azores, a lot of people from Cape Verde. And so they would go there first, get all their supplies, get all their stuff together, and then they would go out. And you're exactly right. They would go down over here, Cape Horn, right? Great place to go up around here. And when we're talking about big, big pods of whales, okay, we're talking about the Pacific, especially sperm whales, right around here. If we're going to get for right whales and bowhead, we're going to go north. We're going to go to the Arctic. And so this is a very dangerous section over here, Cape Horn. First of all, there's a lot of gale winds, a lot of hurricanes. A lot of ships tried to go through, couldn't make it. And so whaling was great because they discovered a lot of the world by whaling. They went to the Pacific Islands over there. They would go to the Indian Ocean. They would go around Africa in order to get back home. And so they would go to tropical places, right? Really nice looking warm places, and then they would go to places that were not so warm. And this was often the case. But I want you to realize something, okay? When I said that at its height, whaling had over 1,000 ships, you have to realize that now we got the Charles W. Morgan. We got one. But if you notice, what do you notice about this painting? Is there only just one whaling ship? Really look. Is there only just one? There's 3, okay? So you were never alone. Very rarely you just see just one whaling ship just going out there. Because they all went to the same places. And when you read a lot of the logs from the Morgan, they hung out all the time. I don't know how they got any work any done. Because they constantly were talking about, we saw this ship, and then we hung out with them for a while, and we did this, and we did that, and then we went out. We didn't see anywhere else. We went back to the other place, and was meeting with these people. So there was a huge community. Okay, that's very important. Because when you're going out, you're alone. But when you're going out and you're seeing all these different people who are doing the same jobs you are, it makes you feel good. So this is a picture of a crew. Give you a second to look, okay? There's one weird thing about this picture. I don't know if anyone can notice it. There's a dog in the middle, right? Dog is very impersonal. Doesn't want to look at the camera. I've heard some people say, that's a very hairy man. It's like, but you have to imagine, a lot of times the crews became like families, especially ones who had been whaling for a very long time. And so they might bring pets with them. But the case of the Morgan, we had some of our captains actually bring their families aboard. That was not a lot of times the case, especially for women. Where are women in the here? All my women? Yeah, you wouldn't want to be on there. They're like, oh, women didn't get to whale. Would you really want to go out? You'd be gone for 3 to 5 years. You're hanging out with like 30 men on a ship with no really great conditions for washing, for shaving, for laundry. Your food is bad after a certain while. You don't get fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, fresh meat. They would say that you could smell a whale ship before you could actually see it. And so this was not a great place. But if women really loved their husbands, and women and men wanted their wives with them and whatever, and they had a lot of kids, they might do that. And so you have to imagine you would have chickens on board. Sometimes you'd have goats. You'd have sheep. I don't know why. You would never have a cow. You know why? Cows have very bad balance, so they would tip over. It's true. It's true. That's one of the only ones that they wouldn't bring with them, because of the balance. Yeah.
But whaling was incredibly dangerous for a variety of reasons. So why in the world would somebody want to take his family with him? Because when you put the camaraderie next to, gee, I can get killed very easily, it's sort of a no-brainer.
I think you have to imagine a lot of times there's one story. I don't want to misquote it. But it said here, there was a captain from Nantucket, and he took to sea at the age of 13. He left his picture of his life as a whaleman. Okay, during 37 years, I was home but 4 years and 8 months. There were 23,000 barrels of oil obtained by vessels which I sailed in. During his time, he traveled over 1 million miles. But out of 37 years, he was home 4 years and 8 months. And so to answer your question, that gives a very good reason of why. It's because a lot of times when you read the accounts of captains, they were out to sea, and their wives would die. They would lose children. Their wives would have children which could not possibly be theirs. And so there's a lot of hardship. You make a sacrifice when you go out to whale. And a lot of times they could handle it, but in some cases, they wanted their families with them. And I think in turn their families wanted to be with them. You have to imagine for the kids, you're born and you never see your father. And sometimes the captains would say, they would get their letters and they would say, oh my gosh, their child is like 8 years old, never having met their father, never having seen them or been with them. And so when they meet them, they're complete strangers. And the father's home for maybe a couple months until there's another whaling ship that's going out. And he's the main breadwinner. Yes?
Do you remember in the film Down to the Sea and John Barrymore's character's name is Bering Joy? Because he was born in the Bering Strait.
Yes. Actually, we'll be watching a little bit of a clip from that movie at the end. But and so that's a reason why. And so, sometimes it was really hard. The camaraderie was kind of strange. But sometimes the kids warmed the hearts of the crew. We have a lot of accounts of when we talk about families at sea and life at sea with children, at the holidays and birthdays, that it made it a little bit more special. And so this is a typical image of a crew from a ship. This is actually from Down to the Sea and ships. And so they would live in the forecastle, which is the foremost part in the tween decks of a ship. So you feel they're rocking a lot more. It's very cramped quarters. On the Morgan, there's, I think, 24, 28 bunks in that small little living space. And so you really have very little personal space. But your tasks still continue. You still have a lot to do. And so you can see them doing laundry. And if you notice, so this is the try-work, so you'll get a better image of it. But can everyone guess what this is right up here? It's not a cloud. It's a sail covered in smoke. Because you have to imagine after a few times of heating up those try-works, that white sail is not going to look so white. So that gives you a really good image. Again, this is a really nice one of the different animals that they could have on here. And so even kids would bring cats and dogs along with them. And it made it a little bit more homey on a difficult voyage. This is a really great image that we usually circulate a lot around the Seaport, especially around those museum teachers. But this talks about some of the end of whaling. And you can see here it says the oil wells of our native land, they will never secede. And this was, it's really nice. With the discovery of petroleum, you no longer need whale oil to do all those things. You have a different source. And so, the process of whaling really died down a significant amount. And in the case of Nantucket, after the Civil War, Nantucket, there's a passage from one of the historians that says like I think it was in 1862, not one whaling ship has been outfitted for a voyage. Not one. Because at that point, whaling was really starting to decrease. You have a little bit of a bump in the late 1800s, and then it dies down by 1900. And so a lot of the information that we get, all of this data that I'm telling you about, a lot of it is kept by logbooks, right? And logbooks are kept by the first mate, who's the second in command on a whaling ship. And his job is to detail some of the stuff that you might think is not very significant, like the weather. He might also tell you about their latitude and longitude, where they were. But for us, it's very important as historians. We need to know these things so we can track where they were, why they did what they did. And if you see here, they have special stamps. It's kind of hard to see with the clarity of the photograph. But inside, what they've done is that they've written down how many barrels were rendered from that whale, so they could keep a track. And they even went so far, if you can see it here, there's initials. They will say who caught that whale. So they keep a record of everything. They want to know who caught the whales, who didn't catch the whales. And the ones that don't have that means that they're in the process of being rendered. So they have been caught, but they're not finished being tried out. Sometimes you'll see a little whale tail stamp. That means that they saw a whale. They might have lost the whale, but they saw the whale. So they keep very, very, very good records, which is good for us. And this was actually done by one of the crew members. And it's a journal. You can see he just writes March. Doesn't do anything else, just March. But there's really beautiful images of the process of trying out the whale and of rendering out the oil. And so this you can see is the whale hunt itself. That is the process of taking the blubber off. Would they have done it on shore? No. But it's a very good image. And so they got very artistic with that. And this is, sorry, my voice. This is an image of the Morgan itself, back at dock. And this is an old photograph actually. And so the whaling ship, the Morgan, okay, she was built in 1841. So I usually ask this of like my younger kids. So I'm gonna put this to you now. Can anyone guess how old she is if she was built in 1841? Wait for everyone to do that math. Oh, silent. 174. Yeah, she's 174 years old. And she was built to whale for about 20 years. That's typically how long whaling ships lasted. She whaled for 80 years. 80 years. Her last voyage was in 1921. Yes?
Why are they she's?
Why are they she's? Does anyone have an idea of why ships are called she's? I haven't heard that before. It's because when women go out, they talk about how you have to put a lot of care into the ship, right? You have to take care of the ship. You put money into it. You invest time. And so they would protect the ship. Their job was to keep it safe, to keep everyone from perishing. You want to be able to eventually get home. That is your goal, to make money and to go home. And so they would revere the ship as much as they would revere maybe a woman in their life. A wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter. And so it became almost like a personification of a ship. You protect the ship, and in itself, it will protect you. Like a mother does. That's the first image you think of when you think of a mother is safety and protection. And so, not as much typically on a whaling ship, but on different kinds of ships, you see those, they're called, what are they called now? Oh my gosh, they're called figureheads. Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. My brain just died for a second. Figureheads. And a lot of times the images on the figureheads are of women. And the women are not doing anything else but just standing there. And they have a very serene, very calm look on their faces, very gentle poses. We have a huge collection at the Seaport of figureheads. And they have their hand across their chest, and they kind of have their hand down, and they're looking up. And who would attack a ship like that? Would you attack an unarmed woman? No. And so they did that also as remembrance of the women in their lives. And so that's why the ships are typically referred to as she's. But to get back to the Morgan, nice try. You can't get me off of this. The Morgan itself, she was for 80 years. She went to all different kinds of ports. And this past summer, she went out on her 38th voyage, which was an amazing opportunity. And I've been working at the Seaport now for 3 years. I was able to go along with the Morgan. And it was such a fantastic experience. She went to different ports. She went to New London. She went to Provincetown. She was a little bit she was in Martha's Vineyard, the nicest place there. She was in New Bedford for 4th of July, which was her home port. It was the first time she had been there in many, many years. And she went to Boston. She went to Cape Cod. And so she was out for the whole summer. She had a vacation for herself. And but she was in the process. She hadn't sailed since 1941 when she first arrived in Mystic Seaport. And there's a very, very poignant image that we have of a black and white photograph of her crossing. For those of you who haven't been to Mystic, one of the most iconic things is the Mystic Bridge, the drawbridge, right? And it in the typical old-fashioned way, it draws up and draws down. And there's an image of her coming through, arriving in Mystic in 1941. And there's a beautiful image of her arriving back in August of last year. And we have some of the people who work at the Seaport who were alive, and when they were children, they remember seeing the Morgan come in. And they were able to speak about it, which was a very powerful thing. And so when she went out, she didn't go whaling. But I ask you, when you go home, there's a wonderful video on YouTube. You can even look it up on YouTube. And it's called Whale Ho. And she was in Stellwagen Bay. Whale Ho. She was in Stellwagen Bay, which is a maritime sanctuary. And we have a wonderful crew at the Seaport who do a lot of rigging, and they go on whaleboat races and stuff. They're very passionate people about that. I like to watch from the sidelines. I educate the people about it. Don't ask me to get in a whaleboat. I tried to once, and I did a lot of what's called catching crabs, which means when you're rowing, and you have to imagine these are not like little rowboats you go like this. No, these are enormous oak pieces that you have to row, right? And catching crabs means that all of a sudden everyone else is going at the right rhythm and you're not on that rhythm. So the oars get kind of they get stuck and you fall over. And I did it about 4 times, and I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And but we have a very good crew who did this. And so we went to Stellwagen Bay, and in the video you can watch, what they did was the ship was there, and there were tons of humpback whales, of minke whales, of fin whales swimming around, going crazy. And they took the whaleboats, they pulled them down into the water, the crew got in, they started swimming amongst the whales, right? And I'm sure the whales are thinking, I thought we got rid of you people, what are you still doing here? But I talked to some of the crew members who went out on those whaleboats, and they said, oh my God, why would you ever do that? Because you have to imagine, for the sailors who are out, right? The whaleboats are about 20 to 30 feet, and the sperm whales, in particular, it rides between 50 and 90 feet, and they weigh about 300 or 400 tons. Okay, yeah, they're big, and so you have a whaleboat, and the whaleboat, when you hunt the whales, right, you're hunting with the harpoon, and I'll show you a harpoon, but you have to hit it perfectly. You don't get a second chance, and like I said, that blubber is a foot thick. So you have to puncture it at a really great angle using force and motion. And so for a lot of these people who are going out whaling, if this is their first time, all they see is this black thing underneath the water. They have no idea what it is. And so that depiction from Paris of that monster, that could very well have been what they were imagining. And so they're in this little whaleboat, and in order to puncture the whale, they have to be pressed up against it. So what the phrase they would use is it was like wood on black. because you were literally on top of it. So this thing is it's right underneath you. And all it has to do is just move a certain way, and that whaleboat tips over. And so the people that were out were like, why would you ever do this? Because they were not even being threatening about it. They were just swimming around, and these enormous creatures are just right up alongside them. And so and the dangers associated. The last thing I'll talk about is some of the dangers, because I love talking about that. Kids love it. And even adults love it. They love the bloodshed, they love the gore, they love the dangers, right? And so some of the dangerous things about this, let's just talk a little bit about it. And I'll show you all the artifacts. I'll let you, if you want to touch some of them, I'll let you touch some of them. But when you go on the whaleboat, first of all, on a whale, you have this enormous whale. So one of the things it can do is there's 3 different options that the whale could do. First thing the whale could do is he could thrash around. And so he could inadvertently just flip his dorsal fin, and there goes the whaleboat. And we have a lot of accounts of whalers who are in the Arctic, who are dressed really warmly for the weather, but you fall into the water, and you get hypothermia and you die. Or you drown, because it's so heavy. You also, I hate to tell you this, but there was no YMCAs back in the 1800s. So how do you learn to swim? Well, you don't. Or you learn on the fly. But if you're in severe waters in the Atlantic or the Pacific, that's not really the best opportunity to. There's no wading pool. And so a lot of times they would drown because they didn't know how to swim. You have to imagine, so that's one thing that the whale could do. Now, we all heard the story of the Essex, right? 1820, whale goes crazy and actually hits the ship itself, okay? That's an extreme case. It's not always the case. But in a small little whaleboat, take that into perspective, all right? And so you have that option. Now, sperm whales are great because they can catch those giant squid, but that means that they can also sound or dive very, very deep, very deep. And so if they dive, right, that leaves a slight problem if the whaleboat is attached by the harpoon. So if the whale dives, there's only so much line you have until the whaleboat is also following the whale down, right? And so you have that horrible choice of either dying or cutting the line. And if you cut the line, that means you have to be out for even longer catching whales, right? And so if you lost that whale that way, everyone would ridicule you on your crew, and you would kind of not be the favorite. And then the third thing that could happen is using a wonderful phrase about Nantucket, sleigh ride. Good job, guys. Nantucket sleigh ride. And do you have an idea of what that? Can someone tell me what the Nantucket sleigh ride is? What? You have the phrase? You don't know? Come on.
Get dragged around by the whale.
Get dragged around by the whale, right? Time of no roller coasters. This is the funnest thing you could do. Because that's the fastest they might have ever been going in their entire life. Imagine that. No cars, bicycles. You can't get to the speed of a whale. And so this, though, it's a little bit dangerous too, but it's also very thrilling, very exciting for them. And so those are the 3 things. Now, you have to imagine the whales, right? I said they're very, very big. Harpoon doesn't kill the whale, only attaches it to the whaleboat. But you're dragging this dead whale with you. You get to the boat. Now the whale never leaves the water. The head might, the blubber might, but nothing else. The rest of it is staying. And they have this little thing, and it's called the cutting in stage. So it's like a little framework that's up against the ship, and the whale stays there, and the people are pulling the blubber off. Now, the whale is bleeding by this point because you've killed it, right? It's blood all over the place because you stabbed it in its lungs, so it's coming out everywhere. So what's going to attract sharks? And if you've watched Down to the Sea in ships and some other clips, the sharks love it, and it's a feeding frenzy. But it's bad because some of the people, when they're whaling and they have to cut all this blubber off, someone has to be standing on that slick whale. So a lot of times they might fall in. Yeah. And so those are just some of the ways, not including like the bad food, the bad water, being badly treated by captains and crews, storms, all of that. Crazy whales running into the ship. It's man against nature very much. And so whaling, like I said, it decreases at 1920s. You don't see it anymore. And now, of course, as we all know, in the 1970s, with this whole idea of conservation, whales have become very protected. We've discovered that they're sentient beings. They have emotions. They have families. And now there's this greater movement to protect them. And even Japan, I think last year, officially stopped their whaling. I'm not sure if it will continue or not. But that's a good thing for our whales. So I have. There we go. I have objects for the last few minutes that we're here together. I will show you some of them. I will try, if I can, if anyone would love to touch some of them, I will give you that option since you may not make it to the Seaport. You may not be able to do this. And most of these things are usually in exhibits, so you will never be able to do it anyway. But just to give you a little bit of a showcase. What should I start with? Okay. Start with this, right? This is our baleen. As you can notice, I'm not going to try to do that. That's not very smart. But this is the baleen, all right? It is tough. And for those of you who would like to come see it, you're going to notice that right along the edges, it's very, very rough, and you can see little single strands. And if you hold it up to the light, you can see those strands continue on. And this is typically the color of it, kind of greenish, blackish colored, but it differs according to the whale. And to go along with that, I have a authentic, this was actually a gift given to me. It's an actual whale tooth. This is not carved, but there is an art called scrimshaw, right? And that was a beautiful art. Not much money at the time, not until recently when whaling became not a practice anymore, and the art of whaling, the scrimshaw became more and more money. But it was a great thing for sailors because sailors who don't have a lot of things to do, idle hands does what? It's a devil's worship, exactly. And so sometimes the captains, what they would do is they would pry those teeth off and they would give them to the crew and say, here you go, here's something for you to do, let's not get into trouble. And so they would have this job to do. And so if you run your tongue across your teeth, remember that your teeth are very smooth. Hopefully a lot of you have brushed this morning and flossed, but the whales don't have very good dental hygiene. And so we don't do that. So when the whale teeth are given to the sailors, you have to imagine it's built up with plaque and all this gunk and stuff, and it's very rough. And so it takes about 100 hours to smooth it down. And then they'll carve. So this is a little baby tooth, okay? Compared to, this is a reproduction, this is not an authentic tooth, but they're about the typical size. So you're into the process of carving it out. You might, for those of you who are artists, you might, before you even start carving, you might sketch it. And so sometimes they would do it from their own mind. Sometimes they would have copies of magazines, and some of the collections that we have are presidents and really great things from July 4th. I love July 4th. And so they would sketch it. They would use sharp needles, broken pins, whatever they could find to etch it in. And then they would take ink, if they had it, blood, chewing tobacco, great, berries, fruits, anything to get different colors inside. But this was a great gift, a great souvenir for families. And a lot of the gifts are very female-oriented, staves for corsets, pie crimpers, that whole idea, because it was for women that they were giving them. So we have that. We have a barrel stave. So it just gives you an idea. The size of a barrel, much bigger typically and much wider around. But the cooperage itself was an art, and the cooper is the one who makes these different kinds of barrels for the oil. This is the transportation for oil. Talking about art, talk a lot about knots. This is a nice gift that someone could do. This is just knots, right? And so this could be put on a mantelpiece, very nice. And again, another kind of gift, because you're out for a long time. Yes?
Oh, what is that made out of?
I think it's a kind of a hemp, some kind of a natural fiber. What the exact one is, I don't know, but usually it's very smooth. When you come up, you can feel it. And so, very insignificant. This is not museum thing. This is my thing. But I'm a very huge visual-oriented person. That's how I learn. And so I give these usually to my children, and I show them. This is not to scale, but it gives you a good idea of the different kinds of whales. I had a white whale, but it's literally like this big. so it's not. I didn't bring that with me. This beautiful object. Beautiful object. Anyone have an idea of what this is? This is not a deck prism. It's not a diamond. I get that a lot. I'm like, oh my gosh, how nice would that look, this rock? It's a deck prism, right? So when you see this, it will not look like this unless you have it in your house's decoration. When you typically see it, it will look like this. It'll be inverted. And so this section right here is about the width of the deck. And so this smooth section is on the top, right? Don't trip over it. If you need to clean it, easy to clean. But below decks on a wooden ship, you don't want to use candles. You're typically not going to use oil because that's what you're selling. So this is great because it brings in the natural sunlight. And because of its shape, it reflects and reflects the light. So you see a lot of these. Beautiful, beautiful. And it's glass, yeah. It's a very thick, very smooth glass. Talking about the different, I'll show you the harpoon. Okay. It's missing a lot. It's missing the wooden pole. It's missing the rope or the line. But this is called a temple toggle. Punctures the whale here. Does its job with a little barb over here. And then when the whale starts to pull out, okay, it can. I know. It hurts for the whale, but great for whaling itself. With this invention, you're now catching 7 out of 10 whales. Without this, you catch 3 out of 10. So from 30% to 70%. It's a huge invention.
What year was it invented?
1848. By Lewis Temple, an African-American blacksmith, shipsmith in New Bedford. And the last thing is some of the products, my little whale lamp. Yeah, it's very nice, very transportable. And a corset. This is also a reproduction, not the authentic one. But these lines right here are the lines for where there would be the baleen staves. So those are all my products itself. I know I'm running out of time, but if anyone has any questions, oh, beautiful.
Well, I would just like to share with the audience that my husband is the great-grandson of a whaling captain. And I have a picture here in a book that's about the old Bedford, the old Dartmouth.
Will you show it to me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
I
Okay.
bought it. And he went on voyages. He was 6'3".
Oh, beautiful.
He went on voyages from the time he was 22, and he retired at the age of 33.
Oh.
He had 3 voyages around the world, and he had 3 wives.
Wow.
The third one lived. That was my husband.
Oh, very nice.
And he retired in New Bedford and bought a sawmill.
Beautiful.
That's how he lived
Oh,
the rest of his life. Can you imagine?
oh, so wonderful.
Yeah.
How tall is the main mast on the morning?
I think it's about, I want to say 80 feet. Could be higher.
Is it all one piece of wood or is it section?
One.
So if it
gotta be
goes on
one.
a bridge or something, it could be a problem.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It can't. Yeah, because it goes all the way down to the hull. So it's got to. It has to. If there's a bridge, it cannot unless it goes up and down. It can't make it. It can't clear it. Yes.
Many of the historic homes in, I assume in Bedford as well as
Nantucket.
Nantucket, they have the widow's walk.
Mm-hmm.
Top because the women would wait for their men to come back
Yeah.
from the sea, and many of them didn't return. So I guess they began to be called widow's walk.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the oil was stored in barrels on the ships.
Yes.
And what about the blubber?
Blubber. The blubber would be once it's kind of cooked out, kind of like bacon on a frying pan. It's thrown into the fires. They don't do anything with the blubber itself.
They wouldn't bring the blubber back home.
You don't eat blubber, no. They would have no use for it. Once the oil is taken out, they would throw it into the fire as scraps. Anything else that was there, they would just discard off of the ship.
So the oil came from the blubber, or there was oil there to begin with, and blubber in addition to the oil?
There's oil in the sperm whale in particular in its head.
Right.
Typically, though, the blubber, what they do is they cook it and the oil comes out.
They boil it.
They boil it. Yeah, they have these big try-works, and it comes out of there, and that's how they get the oil out, and then the rest of it they just discard.
They do that all on the ship.
Yes, all of it on the ship.
Each ship has its own.
Each ship has its own try-works, and once it returns from a voyage, the try-works is dismantled and put back together because after all that wear, it needs to be replaced.
A big part of the population was that were the ship captains were the Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
Huge population.
In New Bedford, they have a wonderful.
I've been there, that's why I mentioned
Yeah.
it. And a lot of their family
They have the port.
on board. They would take their wives, there was tons
Mm-hmm.
of pictures.
Yeah, their whale museum is fantastic. It really is. How much time do I have? 2 minutes? All right. I can. Yes.
You mentioned that they would take what they needed from the whale.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen to the rest of the animal? They would just discard it?
They would leave it in. They leave it in the ocean.
So it would become food?
Yep.
for the-
Yeah.
Where do they sell all this oil? Like, where's the market? If you're a captain, where'd you bring it and sell it?
You would usually bring it back to the. You would bring it. Sometimes what they would do is, because they'd have to stop off at certain points to get more materials, that they were out for longer and longer. They might trade that oil at one of the different islands that they were going to. But typically, if they came back, they would come back to port, and there were other ships that would bring it out to different ports. And that's why Nantucket started to slow down, because the process of getting the oil from the ship onto the island, putting it back onto another ship to go out, was so cumbersome. It cost so much money. So New Bedford, that's when it started to really, really take over, because it was just very easy to transfer all of that.
It's like the amount of money that they got for doing all this work based on today's lifestyle. What is that?
What was that?
They sold their oil, how much did they get in like today's dollars? Like, what's a captain like in today's society? What kind of job are they doing for money earnings?
It's hard for me to say, and I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but we usually tell kids that it goes ship. There's a lay system, and so the ship owner makes the most, and then the captain, and I forget what the percentage is for each one, but they would make the voyages longer in order to make more money. If the whaling was a very dangerous thing, because greenhounds were the newbies who were starting out, they would get their money sometimes ahead of time. They would get like a little bit ahead, and they would spend it all, so then they owed a lot to the ship. But in the terms of where they were in society as to now, I cannot tell you, honestly, because again, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing when it comes to that. Good question, but I can't answer that. Sorry. Yes?
I think the way it was done is the owner of the ship took the initial take,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest was divided among negotiated percentages. Of course, the more junior people, some of them had much less than 1%.
Yeah.
And we had that in that book that we read last year about the Essex, that they're negotiated percentages and it varied from ship to ship.
Yeah. How much? We're done? I'm sorry. I was other questions. I know. Thank you. Like late 1800s, early 1900s. You're welcome. I'm glad. You're welcome.
This is a real one that's
Yes. Thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then my uncle actually wrote a book
Oh.
about my great-great-grandfather's. Well, there was a specific point in time during the Civil War when one of the ships, the war was still going on, the war was actually moving because they didn't know it, out at sea. One of the ships that was blown up or whatever, so my great-grandfather took the captain. I mean, I actually know how it's on my tongue. Well, the question I had, nobody tried to show me. Yeah, so this was, I don't know, this was like this was north and south. And then, of course, they still thought what was going on. How they knew what ship was northern versus southern. There were some wild stories about once he got shipwrecked in Hawaiian Islands. And he was like 6 feet, he was enormous. And apparently, according to the story, that he was, in Hawaiian Islands. And she took him real late to
He was a rare specimen.
Exactly.
Across
At
the
some
world.
point, I guess the cruise how true the story is. But, you know, my father would tell me.
Wait a minute, the cruise sailed off without the
No,
captain?
they brought the captain and they all kind of slept because I think it's supposed to
Maybe they wanted a longer deal. Like, hey, you know, get some supply. We're really not making a long term all of this. It sounds like we're going to be like, oops, we have a new chick, let's get husband, get married, you know,
Well, the second one was actually the wedding his best friends was wearing that his third wife. So there was a lot of longevity.
really died.
They did, oh yeah, they really died. They really died.
You know, we're losing interest in this is not. They said one of the suits, whale oil,
I know that, yeah, right.
What do you think about it?